Hello, so for those of you who somehow don't know, there's this channel that I'm subscribed to. It's called V. He's a Romanian. He does a lot of good videos. He's funny and eloquent. He tells good jokes. I recommend checking it out. One of his most recent videos called Bernie Sanders Doesn't Tell You Why Socialism Sucks. Basically, he makes the case that he thinks socialism sucks, and he sees that from his own personal experience living in Romania. Now, it just so happens that one of my closest friends is a Romanian. In fact, I actually went to Romania last summer to visit him, and I actually have visited the city of Bucharest, where I think V currently lives in. I sent this video to him and I asked him what he thought about the video and whether he thought that the situation in Romania is as V represents. And also he knows about V. In fact, he was the one who introduced me to V. But after he listened to it, he told me that he thought this is possibly the worst video V has made so far. And for at least a large portion of it, V is akin to pretty much lying by omission. Now, I tried to bring this Romanian friend of mine onto my show to have a discussion about V's videos. But unfortunately, he's currently not very comfortable about speaking on YouTube, so I'm gonna make the response based on what he said. Now, this is actually going to be a re-upload of the video that I previously made because I wanted to try to shorten this response video a little bit and also make some of the points more clear and more succinct. And I decided not to show V's entire video this time around, but I'm going to show a fairly large part of it, specifically in the places that I'm going to respond to. But by all means, please go watch V's video, the original one, and also try out some of his other videos, because he does make some good ones. So let's start, shall we?
That under the Danish tax system, it is possible for a high wage earner to pay up to 51.5% of their total income after gross tax, giving a total of 57% of total income. So half of the money you make in Denmark goes for taxation.
As you can see in his video, 50% is for high wage earner. And I don't know what is considered a high wage here, but the point is that this high of an income taxation is most likely a small percentage of the population that thinks.
But there is more, right? It's not just 51.5%. The European Union invented this really awesome tax, which is called a VAT tax, which in Denmark is 25% of everything you buy.
There is a sale tax in most Western countries. Denmark is probably on the high end. And please note that, for example, in the United States, there are two types of sale taxes. One is the federal tax, which is already included in the price, and the other is the state tax, which is what you additionally pay at the checkout, which is currently around 10% in the United States.
I make around $800 on Patreon. And you would say, oh my God, V, that's excellent. You know, that's a really good wage for what you are doing. It's holy shit. Half of it, well, not half, it's like 45%, right? Goes to the tax, goes to the state. This is how much the state taxes me for running a YouTube channel.
That does sound pretty enormous. I've heard from other Romanians that it's actually 30%, but maybe it's different for making YouTube videos.
In socialist country, you have this thing called rationalization. So everything is rationalized. You don't give usually transplants for old people because you don't have a lot of them, right? There's a limited supply, so you're going to only give them to the young people. You're not going to treat a lot of old people that have serious diseases because you need to save the medicine for the young. So it's rationalized. It's more important to save someone young than to save someone old. This is actually a thing where very few doctors are talking about, but it's something that happens, and like every single code of ethics is going to tell you to act this way. If you have one ambulance and two people call, let's say a 19-year-old woman who is having a heart attack, and a 15-year-old kid who just had a car crash, you send the ambulance to the 15-year-old kid.
The idea is that in socialist countries, there is an unwritten law that says that younger people with bigger chances of survival is preferred for treatment. Because if you have a young person diagnosed with cancer who, if successfully treated, will go on to live for about 30 years, and you have an old person who, if treated, will go on to live only about 6 months, why then would you give treatment to the old person when you have limited resources? Isn't this just logical? Some of the comments suggested that it's the young people and the immigrants who are taking advantages of the socialized healthcare. If we're talking about statistics, then yes, the young may use a lot of it, but they are also the ones that put the most in because they tend to be the people who are working, so it would be non-trivial to say that statistically they take more than they put into it. In terms of the immigrants, usually in order for an immigrant to be in the system, they must work and pay taxes as everybody else. There are people who illegally enter other European countries to get better treatment, but normally this should be a small percentage of the immigrants. So ideally, most people who enter the system should have already clearly proven that they deserved it. But for those who illegally enter the country, if you let these people in, then you have to do it on good merit. Otherwise, just don't let them in. So this doesn't have a lot to do with socialism. When an immigrant enters your country, he's going to take advantages of things that he doesn't have in his native country, right? And that's not just healthcare, but also social care, etc. So that's something that you have to think about when you're letting people into your country, obviously.
Like the old people are not usually covered by Medicare. People that have cancer are only given pain treatment rather than the state providing them for the whole treatment of cancer because they don't have the cash. Despite the fact that they are taking 50% of the taxes from the population, they don't have the tax in order to pay for this.
So V here says that the state doesn't have enough cash to treat old people with cancer. Well, the state is going to give cash to old people up to some point. And that amount depends on the country. You know, Romania is a poor country, so it doesn't have a lot of money, obviously, relative to other Western European countries to give cash. The state usually ends up spending more on old people because they're the ones who tend to have health issues, right? But they're also the ones who have paid taxes from their 35 years of work. So this is the problem with V's video throughout. First of all, he says that they have 50% of their taxes taken. This, as I have said before, is a very small percentage of the population from which this big of a tax is taken from. Secondly, V conveniently omits that 50% of their taxes doesn't all go to healthcare. In Romania, apparently, it's only 5%. In America, let's just say that some poor schmuck got taxed 50% of his income by the state, right? A huge portion of that will end up in the military. The percentage that it actually ends up in healthcare would be relatively small, percentage-wise. The second thing is, regardless of how much you pay your taxes, the state can increase or decrease the percentage that goes to healthcare, which doesn't have a lot to do with the overall tax. Just give the amount to the military what a normal Western country gives, and then keep the money that goes to healthcare. You're going to decrease the tax that the person pays enormously.
If you're in a system like the American system where you have insurances and you have like a private company that you paid your entire life to, at least you have the guarantee that the company is going to provide the healthcare that you need even when you are 95 years old.
Well, anyone would like to believe that from these atrocious medical insurance companies, you would at least get fair treatment from what you pay. But will you? Well, okay, if the state somehow manages to regulate the insurance company really well, you might always get fair treatment. right? In Germany, for example, they have an upper limit of profit that an insurance company can make, so they don't have a constant incentive to pay private investigators and lawyers to bring their prices higher and higher. Because if you do that, you're going to get abuses. Just to give you an idea, my MMR blood test, which is required for my graduate school, was $600 without insurance. Now, when I went to Kaiser, I did ask them how much does it cost to do the test without insurance, which at that point I wasn't even sure if I still had it or not, since I was on my mother's insurance, and there's some rule about if you're not in school or after a certain age, you can no longer be on your parents' insurance. But when I asked this person at the front desk, she just says, "Oh, no, you have insurance, you can just go in." Because apparently they still had me in the system, even though I wasn't supposed to be in the system anymore. And of course, they later found this out and they dropped me from the system. But I still did the blood test, and afterwards, they sent a bill of $600 to my parents. And of course, my parents freaked out. So they asked me to call Kaiser to get this fixed, right? Now here's the funny part. I called 4 different lines, one after the other recommended by the previous receptionist, and nobody I spoke to knew who I was supposed to talk to dispute this amount. Neither did any of them knew how much it was supposed to cost without insurance. They just all said, "Oh no, I don't know, that's not my department." So this is how insurance company rolled like before Obamacare. To discourage you, almost like they're doing evolution in here. The people who did that more are the people who brought more money into the company. And then this culture just had better results for the company, and that's how it was perpetuated.
Which you can have in a socialist system. Like someone who never paid taxes gets to be treated. Like let's say a farmer in Romania who doesn't pay the same taxes as me. Let's say he pays $25 because he makes 50. Because like Romanian farmers are like this, right? They plant their own harvest, and then they eat pretty much what they planted, and the little extra they sell to the market. So they do pay some taxes, okay, but it's very few. Like it's called a self-sustaining system, where he just plants enough for his family, and then he consumes what he planted, and the very little extra that remains, he sells it, right? That person is going to get the same amount of Medicare that I get, right? So I'm making around $800 on YouTube. I pay $400 in tax. The guy pays $25 in tax, and we both get the same Medicare. Do you think that's reasonable? Do you think that's okay?
And V doesn't really address that. Generally speaking, majority of the people pay the same percentage of what they earn. But yes, it is the system of more fortunate people paying more for less fortunate people, right? Socialism. V says this other thing, though, which is that there are people who escape the system. For example, the poor farmer who grows his own food, so he doesn't need to pay tax. Now, that might seem unfair to the people who are paying more tax, and that this farmer seems to be taking advantage of the system. But actually, he's not. Because the farmer still has to pay for tools, seeds, bug killers, and such, basically anything that he doesn't make himself. And those things are quite expensive for even normal middle-class people, not to mention poor farmers. And they have to pay taxes, obviously, for buying those stuff, right? But the difference is because they grow their own food, they may not have, let's say, what most people have as income tax. Because in this case, the farmer is working for himself. Like the builders who build their own shit. So it may look like they're out of the system, but actually, farmers pay taxes just like their equivalent economic class who live in the cities and don't grow their own food, but they have to buy them. Which is, again, expensive.
It's not okay. I hate the fact that I have to pay 25% for everything that I make.
Okay, I actually checked this out, and it seems that in 2010 it was 24%, But recently it was reduced to 20% for general VAT. But there are also other VAT, which was, let's say, previously 9%, and then those were reduced to 5%. For medicine, hotels, food, water, etc., it remains 9%. The luxury tax on alcohol, for example, was reduced 30% of the tax, and they eliminated luxury tax for things such as coffee, but they actually increased luxury tax for the cigarettes. So according to this, actually, the VAT tax was reduced. So it's not always increasing, as V claims.
Maybe I'm becoming a right winger, huh? Maybe because now that I'm making more, I'm becoming a right winger. Because of course, if I would make very little, if I would make like I used to make before I started my YouTube channel, which was jack shit, I would be like, yeah, free healthcare, yay, like of course, great system, best system ever.
By the way, this is actually kind of interesting, but it sounds like he's suggesting that if you were actually making as much money as you supposedly earn, from working really hard, then you don't want that hard-earned money taken away by the government. Well, actually, my parents used to share the same opinion, but then they changed their mind. Guess why? Because I grew up and I needed healthcare. As a student, even as an adult, you still cannot necessarily support yourself all the time because you're in school, which means that if I get sick, my parents would have to pay for it. And they just realized that then the money would just add up, right? More and more. I mean, it's not like when I'm younger, I tend to be healthier and they didn't think about it. Now that I'm older, and my father's side of the family actually has a history of heart disease, so as I get older, I'm starting to have hypertension problems. And they realize that the bill is just going to add up on their end. As a graduate student, I don't have insurance. My university does not provide it, so I would have to buy my own. And before Obamacare, I heard it was something like over $1,000 per month.
Yes and no. You still have to pay for the books. You still have to pay for everything extra. Like I'm in med school, I still have to pay for the medical equipment.
So what is V saying here? Practically nothing. Just that the state doesn't pay for everything. Well, it seems that before he says that you should pay for everything yourself, right? And now he's complaining that the state doesn't actually pay for everything. Well, neither is the United States government paying for everything for the public K through 12 education. You do have to pay here and there for materials and such depending on which class you had to take. But it's pretty much like this. In air quote, non-socialist countries like the United States, the state ensures that you have free education for 12 years of your life, right? Now, in quote-unquote socialist countries, they make sure that you have free education for 12 years in your life, plus 3 extra years of really cheap. So that's the huge difference. And my Romanian friend mentioned at this point that this is not like Romania during the communist years, because that was socialist. I mean, you had 5 years of schooling on top of 12 years for free. The second point is the state does pay for the most important and the most expensive stuff, such as the building, the salary of the teachers, the janitors, the electricity, the water, etc., etc. Those are given to the students, right? And those are the big expenses. And they're given for quote-unquote free. Both in America, from K through 12, and Romania, K through 12 plus a bonus.
I still have to buy lab coats, I still have to purchase human bones in the first year in order to study anatomy and all of that. So there's it's not really free.
By the way, I want to mention that in the United States, if those are the only things that medical students have to pay, holy shit, there wouldn't be so many medical students who are in deep shit in debt, and others who are trying to get their medical degree in just 3 years, just to lower the potential debt and costs. So imagine trying to cram 4 or more years of studying, of work, of knowledge into 3 years. Also, textbooks are super expensive in the States as well. Most textbooks that I had to buy for college or for my graduate studies was over $100. And medical textbooks are even more expensive on the average in the United States. In fact, the most expensive textbook record was set by a medical textbook of, I believe, $1,000. And this is because you're paying the medical school an insane amount of money, and they think that, well, I mean, you're going to make shitloads of money anyways, right? When you become a doctor, so we'll just make sure that we get our cut before that happens. And then you get your medical degree, and because you paid so much money, you are in turn trying to make even more money. And when the doctors in the United States manage to make even more money, the medical schools just charge their future students even more. It's almost like an evolutionary arms race. No limit here.
But then again, there's no guarantee that you will able to find work.
As opposed to what? Where was it a guarantee? Is it a guarantee in America that you're going to find a job once you get your degree?
Let's say someone who doesn't have cash manages to get into the university through a scholarship. The scholarship is not for all the 6 years. The scholarship is just for the year you're in, and you need to still get good grades in order to remain under the scholarship the second year. So basically what happens is, let's say someone who is really poor manages to get into the University of Medicine, and he studies really well 3 years, but then, I don't know, let's say he has like I'm not going to say he gets lazy, right? I'm not going to say he finds a nice pair of titties and he neglects his studies. No. Let's say he has a tragedy in his family, right? His parents die in a car crash, and now he can't focus on his studies, and he's really upset and whatnot. And he's going to get lower grades. He's not going to fail, but he's not going to be able to maintain the A+. He starts getting B's and C's. And now the state says, well, you got lower grades, you're not going to be able to keep studying. You need to pay for your education. So the guy can't pay. And it's like 3 years of his life down the drain because of the system, right? Had he known before, maybe his parents would start gathering cash in order to pay his education. Maybe he would have chosen a different university. Maybe med school is too expensive. Maybe he could have gone to the nursery school or something like that.
So V's point here is the following. The state gives a poor child cash to study in medical school, and then something happens during, let's say, this person's second year, and he starts to get low grades. And then he ends up losing his scholarship, right? So then, according to V, it would have been better if they had not given this person scholarship to begin with, because then he wouldn't have started medical school and instead do something else, right? There are several things wrong with this. First of all, this happens in the United States as well. I mean, you can get a scholarship, right, from various sources. And, the same thing could happen. Second of all, V is saying that instead of giving people false hope, just don't give them. And let them choose something else instead. Well, first of all, unless this student is really incredibly stupid, it's not like he doesn't actually know that something bad might happen before he puts himself into the situation. Secondly, if something bad does happen to him and his grades are lowered and he loses his scholarship, somebody else gets it. It's not a zero-sum game. And somebody else's life becomes so much better because of the state. So how has the state done a bad thing overall from this perspective? Okay, so for this dude, it didn't work out, but somebody else's life will probably work out. It's not like every person from a socialist country is so retarded to go into something that he or she can't handle.
So if the poor people would gather up and they would start the party for the poor, where they tax the rich people and they try to, nationalize some of the wealth and whatnot, they could technically, theoretically do that. There's absolutely nothing stopping the poor from making their own radical party and then voting for it.
What V just described is communism, of course. Just that obviously people are corruptible and the poor leaders will become the new nobles. That's all. Happened many times in human history.
Especially when it's really competitive, because everyone wants to stay afloat. Everyone wants their education to be free. It's really expensive in Romania, at the University of Medicine. It's one of the most expensive universities ever.
Okay. Really expensive in socialist Romania means that per year you might have to pay something close to 800 euros. I wonder if V would like to come to America for medical school and cram his 6 years of studying into 3 years. Because of the bills. Good luck with that. And by the way, even a low-level university in the United States, one of the cheaper universities in the United States, cost at least $15,000 a year. So that's how much it is, $15,000 a year at least, not to mention medical school.
Like if you want to start medicine and then you want to drop it and start gender studies, you have to pay for gender studies.
Does V think that if we have a capitalist system, the gender study schools will be as expensive as the medical schools? Let's just say that eventually everybody needs an advanced degree to get a job. I would bet that the gender study schools would be much cheaper than the medical schools. Wouldn't that actually then deter people from going to medical schools and becoming doctors and instead all flock to gender studies? I mean, it would be easier and cheaper, and you get a degree. So V here is saying that socialist system may create a false sense of security, and you may feel empathy for the people who are mistreated by the socialist system, and this seems to be his only argument for why socialism is bad. Okay, but who are these people that you feel sorry for? Well, apparently, these are the people who cannot realize, even though they have all the information up front, that maybe, just maybe, they won't have a scholarship every year in those 6 years. Maybe they should think before they make an important choice regarding their future careers. Are these the kind of people that you feel sorry for? Because if so, then you should definitely ban people from mortgaging houses, borrowing money, and just stuff like that. I mean, shouldn't people pay for any bad decisions that they make in their life?
It's called an acciza. I don't know how it's called in English, but it's similar to a luxury tax, okay?
I was told that it's not called a luxury tax. Apparently, it's a general term from an additional tax because the state wanted to control the market somehow. But it also applies to some luxury items. For example, gas had this kind of special tax, as we mentioned, for a very long time, but nobody ever claimed that gas is a luxury item. It would be like claiming that water is somehow a luxury item. By the way, apparently, there was no luxury tax for cigarettes during communism in Romania. And apparently this was something that really struck the Romanians because it came together with Romania's getting into the European Union. And it was one of the measures required to get into the European Union. And it's probably economic. It may have something to do with the pressures towards the tobacco company. Because, for example, in Europe, you're not even allowed to smoke outside while walking. And apparently this has been a long-term campaign. And seems that Japan does it as well. But in communist Romania, there was no such thing. And that's how people started to become really outraged.
The only thing that is free is in China because they use the actual prisoners in order to do free shit.
Right now, the prisons in the United States are in the danger of becoming industrialized. So they're in the danger of being owned by corporations, basically. And they pay the prisoners practically nothing. So it's also pretty close to slavery in the US as well. Think Shawshank Redemption, right? I did hear, on the other hand, though, in Scandinavian countries, they pay prisoners solid wages. So apparently, prisoners are not slaves in socialist Scandinavian countries.
And you will say, well, in Denmark it's quite a good place to live. And yeah, but that's because like the people from Denmark, as I understand, are very hardworking, like all of them.
Yes, obviously, everybody knows that people in Denmark are very hardworking, like all of them. Americans, on the other hand, are just lazy assholes, you know? Even though study has shown that Americans work more than anybody in the industrialized world. In America, 85.8% of males and 66.5% of females work more than 40 hours per week, which is 137 hours more than the Japanese, 260 hours more than British, and 499 more hours than the French. But this is why socialism will never work in America, because Americans are lazy, obviously.
Yeah, take into account that when you give cash to me, you also provide Medicare for some farmer out there or some gypsy who doesn't work.
Oh my god, the gypsies! They have it so good. They have to buy their own bandages and their own medicines, and they complain that they barely have enough money to pay the janitors. You know, there's so many hospitals in Romania in which you actually have to bring your own sheets from home. That's how suck the situation is in Romania state hospitals. But heck yeah, the gypsies are really ripping off the Romanian socialism system good. Okay, so that's all of this video. Okay, I just want to say lastly that that Romanian friend of mine has stated that living in Romania is indeed shitty, but he still prefers living in Romania than living in the United States, and he doesn't even consider himself a socialist. He has said that he would probably be more inclined towards libertarianism than anything else. But the issue that he had with V's video is with V's arguments in his video, which, for the most of them, they're bad arguments. And they're bad because, first of all, V tried to compare the socialist way to solve things versus the non-socialist way to solve things, but he only managed to bring up things that are actually not that much different when comparing between the two systems. And second of all, V has made a lot of nonsensical arguments. You know, like the false hope argument in terms of the state paying for your own tuition. A free healthcare in a Western country generally works okay if it's wealthy enough and well administered enough. You know, Romania, on the other hand, there's not enough money because Romania is a poor country. But the major problem with the system in the United States is not the fact that in the United States healthcare is not free and you have to pay out of your own pockets. Because if it's only that you have to pay for going to the doctors, then my Romanian friend, C, for example, would be fine with the healthcare in the United States because he would come to the United States and work very hard. And he can say, well, in Romania, I had to pay 5% of my salary and put it into the Romanian healthcare. Well, here in America, I only need to take 5% of the income every month and not just put the money in a bank account for when I have to pay, right? I just need to save my money in a special account and the state can't touch it, and that's great. Sounds very reasonable, doesn't it? However, when you go to a hospital and they tell you that for a blood test it costs $600, you will say, well, wait a minute. How is it 20 times more expensive than in Romania? Why the difference? And this is where the fucked up part really is. They will just tell you, whatever, we ask whatever price we want. It's not like the state regulates us. And then you might ask, well, then how does this non-socialist system work? And they might tell you, well, big insurance companies will hire negotiators and lawyers, and they can hire their own medical specialists to negotiate the price. But how is a private individual supposed to do that? They can always tell you, hey, if you don't like the negotiated price, sue us. And you know in the United States how much of a hassle that is and how much you would spend just on hiring lawyers alone. But you work hard and you earn money, right? Well, once a hospital hears that you are, for example, trying to buy a house, they will laugh and say, oh, come on, you have enough money. We'll just stick it up in the next 30 years and you pay as you go. And obviously the interest rate will be enormous, but you won't be able to see that. It's just $15 a month, and then you end up paying not $600, but something like $2,000. So this is what happens. This is the fucked up part. The fact that the insurance companies can screw people over. But hey, you can always have more choices in the United States, right? Go to another insurance company. This insurance company screw you over, and then you might get a phone call from another one that will say, hey, I heard that you got screwed by this other company. Why don't you come over and get screwed by us? And we guarantee that our company will make sure that the previous company will stop screwing you. You know, it's like Chicago in the 30s going from one mobster to another. Sounds like heaven compared to socialist country, doesn't it? V is full of shit.